everyone, please welcome Sam. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks for having me along.
It's good to have you. We're excited to find out all about Unboxed, Medicine Unboxed, and kind of your career in the NHS as well. So hitting two different things, it should be really interesting. So to start off, just so that our young people can get to know you a little bit better and where you've come from, could you tell us a little bit about your career journey and what it is you do now?
Yes, sure. I'll start at the end. So I'm a doctor, a medical doctor. I'm a cancer specialist, which is the same as saying I'm a consultant oncologist. I look after persons who have lung cancers and brain tumours, and I work in a hospital, a cancer centre in Cheltenham, which is a small town somewhere between Bristol and Birmingham, lost in some hills. I also chair the law and ethics group in this hospital, which is a kind of structure that helps health professionals think about what the right thing, I guess, is to do for a patient they're looking after, rather than just necessarily what is possible, but what right care might look like. I direct Medicine Unboxed, as you've alluded to, more of which I guess later, and I write. I was born and brought up in London, which is where I did all my medical school training. And then there's this kind of long period between completing your training and then starting as a consultant, which is notionally called your junior doctor years, your training years, which is in the news a lot at the moment. As I'm sure you all know, amongst other things about the NHS. And that training for me happened across London and the Southwest, as well as stints in Australia and some volunteering in India. Always kind of meandering towards oncology, I guess, for me, and cancer care.
Nice, thank you. Interesting to find out you did some abroad work as well. Definitely didn't know that, so must have been nice to kind of go abroad and do some different medicine in some different environments.
Yeah, sure. It was absolutely illuminating.
Maybe we'll sneak a question in about that later, because it sounds very interesting.
Sure.
So thinking of choosing your career, medicine is such a huge field and there's so many different aspects to medicine. How do you know that you're suited to go into medicine? What sort of values or characteristics does a person need to have in order to be able to be successful in medicine?
So that's a really good question. It's a huge question, and I feel slightly daunted at the thought of answering it, because I think it seems to me that there isn't one definition of that. I often will say to persons under my care, if you go to see 10 doctors, you may come away with 5 or 6 different opinions. And I think that's just as true for what constitutes good medicine, what constitutes success within good medicine, what we mean when we talk about a good doctor. So that it could mean anything from a surgeon whose operative survival figures are really great, to someone who has really great communication skills and cares deeply for his or her patients, to a researcher who doesn't see patients necessarily but is advancing the science, to someone who works in a field hospital, far from the kind of technical prowess we're so comfortable with in the West and middle and high income countries. So I think when we talk about good medicine and a good doctor and success, we're kind of reaching and grasping for a multitude of things. Maybe not a million miles from what we mean when we talk about a good person, or ideas of love. We can very easily romanticize these ideas, but they're describing lots of things. For me personally, I think success in medicine is measured as absolute commitment and drive towards the person in front of you, and those past that person are also waiting for your care. A drive that is motivated by a sense of service and duty to that person, informed by absolutely by science, good science. So knowing the right treatment, the dosages, the toxicities, as an oncologist, but actually so much more than that, technical bit that's really important are how we choose and deploy language in our communication with others, how we work within teams, how we arrive at judgments, hopefully informed by collective wisdom about the right thing to do, how we recognize our limits, how we look after ourselves, how we feel a sense of wonder and enchantment in what we do, and how we educate others, and work towards the development of a collective that then goes forward and does our work past us. So all of those things I think are really important to the whole business of good medicine. But immediately when I'm talking about it in that way, I guess I'm also describing good citizenship and good humanness.
Yeah, I guess it's really important to be able to value other humans and understand empathy for their family, and having that drive. You must have so much drive as a doctor, because all the information, you touched on it then, like talking about like dosages and knowing everything about these medicines. I don't know how you have the ability to store all of that in your head, and it's so important that you do it. You must have so much drive to keep going every day, and just be such a strong human to be in and out listening and helping people who are in pain or suffering.
Yes, I think that's maybe that's true, certainly, but I think what becomes increasingly clear is that all the stuff you learn at medical school, accumulation of endless facts, in order to get you through medical school exams. Actually, when you're functioning as a doctor, thankfully, I suppose the key thing that's clearer and clearer is that you're only as good as your teams. And so the nurse specialists, the pharmacists, the physios, the nurses on the ward, the porters, the cleaners, the domestics, the managers, make my job possible, or rather my job's only possible because I function within a team of professionals with a multitude of skills, many of them quite unsung. When you hear about hospitals and medicine on the news, you very rarely hear about the collective, and actually it's the collective that makes things possible. That's for me the wonderful thing about working in a hospital. You wander down most of what you see on hospital soaps, Holby City and ER, is so far removed from the truth, but the corridors are real. So you wander around the corridors and there'll always be people you're bumping into and conversations you have, and I find that really fun and rewarding. But those individuals that you're kind of crossing all the time and meeting are just as important to the care of Mrs. Jones as the slightly more spotlit medics.
Yeah, we had a broadcast a couple of weeks ago, with several members from kind of HR within different companies that are part of the NHS umbrella. And they all say that there are so many other roles that people forget about that
Yes.
are vital to the function of the NHS.
Yes.
Down to like, people that are library staff and are managing
Yes.
archives, all the way up, and you can't figure out what's wrong with someone without having archives and evidence of other people and past cases and all those sorts of things that you just don't even consider when you walk into an NHS building, what's
Yes.
going on behind those scenes. mass operation, really.
Absolutely, and at their best, all those individuals are as motivated by, sometimes more motivated by, good patient care as the the doctors. Yeah, really important.
Yeah, so what made you want to become, an oncologist and go that path? What was it about oncology that you decided that that was something that you wanted to kind of dedicate part of your life to? Because a lot of young people think about, oh, I want to be a doctor, but when it comes to it, it can be so difficult to start thinking about where you go and how you figure out, what specialism or what pathway within the whole of being a doctor that you can do. How did you figure that out?
That's really, you're touching on really important stuff here. The short answer is it's not. It's very rarely. I mean, I think there are individuals who I slightly envy who have a very kind of clear view of what they will do in life from day one. And I meet some amazing young people who tell me they will be a vascular surgeon, and they almost certainly will be. It was never quite like that for me. And actually, interestingly, I think things that seem quite black and white when you're young become much grayer later. And indeed, I think they probably were grey when you're young, but you're presented with a worldview that says you need to know what you want to do, you need to pass your O levels or your A levels, and sorry, GCSEs and A levels, and you need to, now that dates me, and there and have a clear vision of what you want to be. I think that's opening up a bit more now, thankfully. We're much more open to the fact that things exist on a spectrum in so many facets of life. Interestingly, maybe what we want to become professionally is late in arriving in that slightly more nuanced space. It could do with a bit more of that, because actually, I think what you want to become is perhaps less important than what you value and what's important to you and how you want to be. For me personally, I was drawn to a number of different interests in medicine. So when I went for my oncology registrar interview, I was slightly uncertain. Did I really want to do oncology? Was it elderly care? I quite liked ITU. As a medical student, I was really drawn to psychiatry and pediatrics. Still now, as an oncologist, I've been a consultant oncologist since 2006. I find myself sometimes kind of dreaming of an alternative version of myself as a pediatrician or a writer, or indeed I trained in London, and I used to walk past the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts and kind of look up at it and think, well, maybe wouldn't it have been great to have gone to drama school? And every so often I kind of, I don't know, mess around with what if. So I don't know. I really love oncology, and the thing that draws me to it, I suppose, is that cancer medicine is it's so full of technical stuff and really high flying science and technological development, but at its heart it's a human encounter at a really charged moment in someone's life, where your communication and your moral judgment and the science all sit in this kind of triangle of stuff all the time. And that makes it perhaps slightly more mysterious than some other specialties in medicine. That's always been the tug for me. But I think sometimes we should allow ourselves the space to just almost inhabit various possibilities and see how things unfold. And so, for instance, seizing opportunities for travel, inhabiting different world views isn't just enchanting for ourselves, but actually as a medic, I think makes you better disposed towards attentiveness, or as you describe it, empathy for others.
Yeah, really, really kind of interesting. Um, to kind of think about. So when you went abroad, were you going abroad for kind of oncology, or was it some other aspect that you were still kind of searching and figuring it out, and what was that like then?
It was various things. So after I finished my after my A levels, I took a year out and traveled and volunteered in India in a development project where I taught. And then, so that was my first kind of almost formal way of going, I'm not going to rush into this next thing. I'm going to just do this. And it was eye-opening and changing. And I would, for what it's worth, encourage everyone to do something like that. Because I think I think travel, be it sitting in an armchair and reading a novel or getting off a plane somewhere else, just prizes open your lenses and your soul to the world in a way that has to be a good thing. It feels like a good thing, and I think it demonstrates other vistas and worlds to us in a way that's necessary to our humanity. And I definitely felt that in that year. It felt really changing and illuminating and awe-inspiring for me. And then I did that at various other points over the course of my training. I worked in a leprosy project again on the other side of India. I went to work in Australia, not in oncology, but in general medicine. And then after finishing my training in oncology, before I started as a consultant, I went to work in as a clinical fellow in a cancer centre in Melbourne. So there was always different facets to this. There was the professional development, but also the personal kind of growth aspects of it. But it's interesting. There's this really good book by a guy called Alain de Botton, who's a philosopher and psychologist, called The Art of Travel, when he talks about how even if you're not going somewhere, far flung and exotic, being at a station, walking down your high street, you can travel by being attentive to all that's around you and having your kind of filters wide open to the world. And I quite like the idea of that now, particularly as I get less opportunity to do exotic traveling. The mindset can still be present.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you touched on some really important stuff. In that, when you are like 17, 18, you don't always have to know exactly everything that you want to do, because there's so much you haven't even done yet. And I think taking the time to really figure out what is important to you and what pulls you, to make sure you're not making the wrong decision in trying to push yourself, is always really key. And I think, seeing the world is a really wonderful place, and understanding different cultures. Even talking to people that live in the UK, if you can't travel, that are from different cultures, and befriending other people that have moved here is so key to kind of opening your eyes up to other people's lives and experiences. And I think, that must have been great to also be a doctor, and to look at that side of things, not just the cultural side, but also in that care side as well. Really must have a lot of value as part of your career and development.
No, I think it did, and I think you hit on something really important there. And I say this as a father of someone who's just started at university, and also someone who's in the throes of his A levels. I think the pressure to be achieving and to be somehow black and white and clear and getting on with the next steps. And I get the importance of that. I don't want to completely do away with it, but it somehow extracts the kind of possibilities of wonder and growth that are not grounded in the A-level syllabus and a black and white career trajectory. There's so much more to human life, which is brief and precious on this planet, in our responsibility to others, which is what for me is the primary drive in medicine, an actualized responsibility to others. But that responsibility to others in our brief lives is present for all of us. And education is an important catalyzer of all of that, but it isn't education as understood at schools isn't the entirety of that. It can't be, it never will be. And there is such richness in encounters within the country, outside of the country, in art, in music. I mean, I don't know, look at Glastonbury this weekend, and the force of so many people being presented with beauty, enchantment and art collectively. Now, you know, how would you describe that as an educative event? You know, I'd be kind of laughed out of town for trying, but it was transformative in what it demonstrated to us through the mediums of art, the reaches and possibilities of what it means to be human and fallible and trying and reaching. That's powerful stuff, isn't it? And it isn't about looking through a microscope.
Yes, and I think that perfectly leads on to my next question. As you brought it up almost naturally within that, and it's, you know, so great. So, thinking of this, could you tell us about Medicine Unboxed and how and why you started Medicine Unboxed and about that project?
So this started in 2009 as a very small project. In all hospitals has something called a postgraduate medical education centre, where, you know, libraries and talks and events are housed, and it started as a small event for about 80 people in that building. But the kind of the drive to that event, or the reasoning behind it, has changed since 2009, or sharpened and evolved. And I think Medicine Unboxed now, for me, is understood as a project that tries to bring health professionals as human beings into contact within an audience of non-health professionals, indeed everyone who is human and will be one day a patient, to talk about medicine, humanity, life as broadly conceived, but through all sorts of spheres of knowledge. So science, healthcare, medicine, music, philosophy, politics, religion, poetry, a lot of poetry, performance. And so over the course of, so we ran this event in Cheltenham in a theatre for 10 years after that initial couple of years in the Postgraduate Medical Education Centre, and found ourselves drawing some really amazing speakers and ever widening audience into what was essentially a day and a half of conversation. I think over the years it went more and more from being a traditional kind of conference with panel events and audience questions into much more something that was pure performance. And our most recent event, in fact, was in London this spring in May, so last month, and that was themed Matter. And it was over the course of a day in King's Place in London. And I think it was the most Medicine Unboxed it had got to being. So there were really brief talks or performances and conversations, no audience questions over the course of a day, and then everyone went upstairs to chat and have a drink. Why matter? Matter because that's the substance of us. We are material structures and organisms. Life is material, but it equally garners so much more that matters. And it was an exploration very much about our connectedness, where we are in a world that's post-pandemic, where a simple little collection of matter, a virus that is neither alive nor not alive, affected us so profoundly, not just medically, but socially, politically. And over the course of the day, we found ourselves talking about what life is, what matter is, the essential dust of us, our connectedness, the refugee crisis playing out across geographic boundaries, and much more than that, peppered and punctuated by performances on a piano, on a tabla, so on poetry that was grounded both in the East and the West, really trying to inhabit our continuity between one another, and how in really feeling and knowing that it sharpens our sense of responsibility to another, but also brings us to attend to one another and feel wonder and feel enchantment as a political act to compel us, I suppose, to act better as humans. So actually, maybe absolutely nothing at all to do with medicine, but everything to do with medicine and everything to do with being human.
And I think it's really lovely to hear you talk about this. You know, when you sometimes say that you think about what if, you know, if you'd gone down an artistic career path and chosen that rather than going into medicine, and yet here you are. You know, you said you've been in oncology since 2006, and you're still having an influence on that kind of performative art side, and you're still bringing that in. You know, so even if you have that what if moment, you could have still almost been led back to where you are now, in a way, bringing on as a guest on a project. There's all the different sort of loops and things that kind of interlink with choices, and how choices never stop, and you can always bring something that you're passionate about back in. And I think that's so lovely about this project as well. Hearing you talk about it, thinking about you and your career, that you've sprinkled that in and brought it back into your life. And
I agree. Thank you, Charlie. There's this great. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. I'm so sorry. There's this great book. There's this. One of my favorite writers is a woman called Ali Smith, who's I'm currently rereading a book I read when I was much younger, which I would tell certainly every sixth former in the world, if they care about words and language and storytelling, to read this book called The Accidental, which I'm rereading at the moment, which is incredible. But there's one of her books is a book called How to Be Both, for which the title, so it's a book told from two perspectives, a young woman now and a character from many centuries ago, and the book reads front to back and back to front from their two versions of the world. And when the book came out, you would get one of two versions of this book, either starting with the current story, the older story, and then you'd read one or the other first. And it's a really moving, great, funny, challenging book. But the title's really important to me always, How to Be Both. And I think, because what it's saying to us here is that we are always not just one or the other thing, and actually humanity is best served by the bothness of us, that I am both me here, but also when I read about or write about others, I recognize my moral range. I am it is an accident of luck that I find myself here in a nice town in a relatively privileged job. I could very easily have been born and brought up in a war-torn country and seeking refuge now at this moment. So the spectrum across which we exist is really wide all the time. And we're beginning to think about that, aren't we, in terms of gender, neurodiversity, and all sorts of other diversities, which encourage us to believe in ourselves in being less binary than we'd like to, but actually they're much wider than that, aren't they? Even.
Yeah, really love that. I've posted the names of all the books that you've mentioned in the chat. So if any of the young people are interested in going away and have a look at some of those books, trying to find them in their libraries or whatever, they can take those and they can go ahead and read them. I might even go have a look at some of them myself because they sound quite interesting, to be honest. So thank you for the recommendations. But definitely, and it's so crazy, really. It's such a journey, and connecting with other people is just so important. Definitely feeling that now more than ever. So we just have two questions left before we move on to our student Q&A. So the final one before we move on to our standard last question is kind of around about topics, you know, and thinking about, you've mentioned a few of the different topics that you touched on matter, but how do you kind of go into that? How do you decide, oh, this is what we want to frame this event around, and these are the topics that we want to talk about? Do they all come up kind of organically or interlinking, or is there a little bit of pre-planning around kind of the structure of those days, and what kind of topics pull you? How do you know, like, that is something that we can make something out of?
They do arise a bit organically. So over the course of the 10 years, the kinds of themes we've had for Medicine Unboxed events, they've always been one-word themes. Stories, wonder, frontiers, mortality, maps, love, and then this year matter. And then within that title for the talk, so for instance, if we look at matter this year, within it, the talks themselves were themed life, dust, ash, ocean, orbit, ghost. So they're really permissive, and give our speakers, I think, and hope, kind of scope to riff a bit, and not be bound by something too prescriptive. I often think of the theme for the event, so take matter or love, as a bit of a hook upon which we can hang all sorts of beautiful ornaments. And then the what has happened thus far, what we always hope to happen, and what seems to happen, is that then the various bits of the day all bounce off each other and echo and amplify into something that's a bit symphonic. It becomes a bit of a mosaic, big, more than the sum of its individual parts, and hopefully generous and creative, and opening. I find myself, if you read something, if you read a novel or a short story or a poem, so much of the work of that, yes, it's what the person's written, but it's what it does then to you, and the questions it leaves you with, and things continue to open, don't they? Or indeed, if you listen to a great pop song. So it's that effect that we hope for, and rather than it being narrowing and reductive, and we are now going to talk to you about the Krebs cycle, and that's it, there's the Krebs cycle, and off you go. But in fact, for anyone out there who is bored by the Krebs cycle, how interesting, as a kind of foundational, fundamental bit of chemistry, that moves us from being a bunch of chemicals to here we are on a screen. So something that effectively the hope is to open both the heart and the head, to stir us intellectually and emotionally and inevitably politically, with those themes.
Great. I think that's a really nice thing to kind of think about as we ask our last question, which is, what is something, a piece of advice or an idea, or a mantra, but what's something that you wish you had learned earlier in life? Could be anything.
It's a difficult question to answer, because it sounds, any answer I fear would sound lectury, as though I've somehow reached wisdom, and I haven't, because I think the things I wish I'd learnt earlier are the things I still would like to feel more now and believe more now. But I do think I wish I had been, I think we should all be less afraid, which is different from not being reverential and moved by awe, but less afraid and more curious and more open to connection and passion. Those things, I think if I felt those things, it would have been nice to have felt them with more conviction at the age of 15 to 20, when, I don't know, I think things can feel overwhelming and terrifying, and maybe more so now. Young people are both driven but also faced with a consistent reminder, I think, of the of a fragile, slightly breaking world, which is true, but also it is a world filled with such deep beauty and wonder and acts of goodness and grace. And so those are grounds to not feel fear so much as to put one foot in front of the other and to find it, and to kind of contribute to it, to be it, because that's what we are, aren't we? We are the world.
I love that. I think I like the way that you're saying, don't expect me to know everything, because I don't. And I also love conviction as well. I think that's such an important thing that can be so difficult to have when you're so worried. But they're right, and the young people that are growing up now are making more change than my generation and my year group have ever done.
Very
And I
true.
look at them and I think, wow, they're doing so much more than I was doing when I was their age. So yeah, what a nice thing to think of. We have some questions that have been submitted to us from different schools, so we'll get through a couple of these before we head to the end of the session. So our first question comes from Oakwood Park Grammar School, and they've asked, does the university that you attend affect your pay and employability once you get out there to get employed?
As a medic,
Yeah, thinking in the world of medicine.
I don't think it does in the world of medicine, actually. I think a medical degree, and so I say this with the kind of health warning that it's been some years since I've been since I left university to medical school, but it remains the case that once you have a medical degree, putting aside the kind of slightly still unfair world or odd world that favors still certain versions of class and privilege over and above others, which we ought to, by the way, hourly challenge. A medical degree is a medical degree, and once you have started as a junior doctor in a hospital, your remuneration is in keeping with remuneration of your colleagues. Of course, as things stand, a point of some contention leading to industrial action that we're all aware of. But no, not especially. No.
Right, I think it's really important, because particularly I remember when I was applying for university, you go, oh, well, that university is better than that university, and well, you're going to be fighting to get into one of the best. And I think it can be a little bit scary sometimes to go, oh, I'm not going to the best one, so therefore I'm not going to have the best career. So it's nice to hear that that doesn't really matter.
And it reminds me of what you
do.
said at the start there, Charlie. What's the measure of success? What's a successful doctor? And of course, of course there will be educational institutions that are better along some metrics than others. But what I think it's important for us to, and I guess this is part of the fear I was describing. There's a terror there, isn't there, which we all feel around the best university, the best job, the best car, the best nursery for my children. Is this the best pram? Am I getting the best treatment? Is this really the best house I can live in? Now, of course, without wanting to undermine ambition, I think it's really important we challenge ourselves a bit around the things we're ambitious for, and also to recognize that actually very often those ambitions are coming from a place of apprehension around not being enough. But actually being human, yes, may be to some extent about our success, but it's to what, if we think about what makes a good life, what is that? What constitutes that? Is it just personal success, monetary gain, and advancing along the social ladder? And to what extent is it how we meet other people and deliver for and to them? And your academic education will be part of that, but only a part of it.
Yeah, Definitely. Hopefully our young people that are watching feel a little bit better about, not as much pressure when it comes to applying there for universities if they are looking to get into medicine, which many of our young people have joined for that reason.
Mm.
They have asked a follow-up question, which is any tips for UCAT or UCAS, so kind of applying for the university process. Obviously, they have to write a statement to help them get in. So, do you have any tips for that sort of process?
I think I think it's really important, not just for that, but what will end up being the case as you advance through your trajectory through medicine, your CV, job applications, interviews, that you so there's one answer to that, which is the performative aspect of it, where you are not just feeling but actually demonstrating and expressing passion and commitment and drive, but really bringing out what's personally important to you. There'll be so many of these applications, and there'll be a kind of similarity across them. So standing out as a person, not because you may have done, kind of a half marathon in an hour and a half or whatever, but because of what you care about, the multifacetedness of you. Yes, having done work experience and having read whatever or done whatever projects, but what it is that moves you towards wanting to be a doctor, what drives you towards that, expressing all the other strings to your bow in terms of music, etc., and presenting someone who is not just necessarily limited to the sphere of science. But it's a difficult thing, isn't it? How do you put that down on as I'm saying that, I'm sort of thinking, come on, I'm almost falling into the trap there of we're playing the game, aren't we? So putting all of that down, there's something wrong with the system, but there we are. That's the system, isn't it? You've got to get
Yeah.
something down on there. So there's no point us. We're not going to change the system, sadly, on this broadcast. So presenting yourself in all your richness, I think, and not being feeling as though you have to be a type. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't read a template of someone else.
Correct.
Write what suits you and
who you
include
are.
all
Yeah.
your individualities and all the
Yes.
things that make you unique.
Yes. You said it much better.
Just summarizing what you said. So our final question then is from East Essex College in Hastings, and they have asked, what's your experience and opinion of the process that it takes to have a career in medicine? So what do you think about the process of when you leave college and go to university and all the way up until you officially become a doctor? What's your opinion on that process?
There's so many different bits to it. So your first, and of course, medical education has changed profoundly since I was a medical student. So there's so many different facets to your time as so speaking personally, as a medical student, every year was an evolution, both in terms of all the kind of knowledge, your first encounter with patients, your recognition of your own limitations, the kind of slightly awe-inspiring others you met who are now on the other side of that boundary between being a person and a doctor, and then through medical training. Looking back now, so much of it was exhausting, terrifying, extraordinary, enchanting, moving, growing. But yet it doesn't. The thing is, it doesn't stop. That's the case now, aged 52, as a consultant oncologist. All of this stuff sits on a continuum, and I think there's real risk for me, and indeed for the structures around me, to go, right, that's it now, I'm cooked, I'm done, off you go. Because actually, I'm as in need of nourishment and attention, perhaps now, as I might have been, different as I was when I was 18. So I think my view on the structures, which is the question, is that they're necessary. There has to be structure around it. and that some of the difficulties, I think, that young health professionals are facing now, aside, of course, from the pay, is that some of the structure has got so rigid for all sorts of reasons as to not permit or be conducive of wider growth and teams and camaraderie, which I think is problematic. So trying to help flourish, help maintain that, because of course it will be the collective that are listening to this conversation who will be the doctors of the future. Maintaining that in your teams is actually vital.
Thank you for kind of talking to us. We are basically at the end of our time now. So is there anything else that you would like to say to our young people before we end today's session? Any sort of final messages you'd like to leave our young people with?
Well, at the risk of sounding, I suppose, trite, just, as the angel said to Mary, do not be afraid, head out there and kind of not just seize the moment, but be it, and see your education as wider than the immediate ambitions in front of you that are career led. Use every opportunity to be the most wide, full, wonder driven person you can, and possibilities. There will be setbacks and challenges, but there is always something past the setback, and the setback almost always, in my experience, has led to a different turn and growth. So possibilities are ever present. If you allow yourself to be kind to yourself and open to those possibilities, try not to give yourself a hard time, because we're all deeply fallible and having the best go we can, and that's all right.
I think it's a really nice message to end us and to end our session on, and I think we've talked about lots of really wonderful topics during today, from your own experiences and your own career to kind of reflecting on Unboxed and life and different projects, and some really kind of key ideas for our young people to kind of go away and think about. And our recommendation for books. I love having a good book recommendation in a broadcast. So thank you for joining us today, Sam, and taking some time out of your day to chat to us about all things wonderful. It's been really great to have you on.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks all.